No one in their right mind would have purchased even an acre on that remote, cold, rainy coast in the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state. Clearly, my father was not in his right mind when he used my mother's inheritance and purchased 100 acres. He would abandon my 3 sisters and I with my mother for months at a time in a tiny hand-built cabin with no electricity, no shower, limited running water, and a poorly constructed outhouse which hung over a cliff and had a tendency to tip in the wind. We used oil lamps for lighting and an old wood burning cook stove for heat. My dad would drive the 4 hours back to Seattle to work and live peacefully in our other house without the bother or burden of children. I believe that was his way of finding solitude away from his 3 crazy, wild daughters. It was the 1950s when children didn't ask questions and whys, or at least my mother would dole their existence with barbiturates and sedatives known as mother's little helpers. When my mother was otherwise disposed, which was most of the time, or when the cupboards were running low, my sisters and I would hike 2 miles through the woods up the beach to the only mercantile, cashing in beer and soda bottles we collected along the side of the single-lane road to buy groceries. Sometimes we'd make a stop for penny candy at Chuck's Chili Bowl, the only diner in Copalis Beach with enough room to seat about 10 customers at a time. More simply, it was not needed. As a young girl, I didn't know any different. This was the life I lived. I thrived on that lonely oceanfront property by implementing vivid and creative imagination and stellar survival skills. Our entertainment selections were very organic. We never went to the movies or theater, and we didn't have a television. However, we witnessed brilliant drama play out on that remote and beautiful place, particularly during tourist season. Few could thrive on this stretch of land where high tides, steep cliffs, and natural barriers dominated the landscape. The turn off the tiny town of Copalis towards our cabin was a neglected single-lane pavement. On one side of our property was the Copalis River, wide and deep. A mile or so south of the river, a resort had opened during tourists, despite the inclement weather and the inconvenient distance from the nearest big city. During the resort's heyday, brave tourists unfamiliar with the area would drive down the beach to explore. Along the way, they would easily cross over small streams of water that fed into the ocean, and they would usually end up at the mouth of the river that bordered our property. My sisters and I would watch from the other side of the river as the drivers stepped blindly out of their cars to calculate the depth and determine if their car would be able to cross the seemingly calm waters. The winding river was deceptive. During the incoming tides, large waves rushed up its mouth, thrashed against the cliffs and the trees, and tore at the banks mercilessly. The outgoing tide gave the river a deceivingly approachable facade. The river appeared shallow, and the small ripples at the mouth hid the actual depth and currents from view. My sisters and I would park ourselves as guardians along the bank, awaiting a visitor from the other side. This was our entertainment, our interactive cinema. We would spend hours wrapped in torn secondhand jackets and old rubber mismatched boots, snuggled against the log, waiting for the curtain to rise. As headlights would break through the fog and slowly approach, we'd jump up excitedly and dance around in anticipation of the opening act. No one objected or told us to sit back down in our seats to behave. We were the entire audience. We held exclusive tickets. As the driver stepped out of the car, we would sprint to the river's edge. In unison, we would scream into the wind as loud as we could. Don't do it. Don't cross. You cannot cross this river. Don't try it. For some reason, the words seemingly always came out as a taunt. Over and over, the outsiders climbed back into the cars, rudely dismissed us, and slowly crept their vehicles into the river. It didn't matter whether they drove high-end luxury cars or four-wheel drive trucks. These strangers were hypnotically drawn to the unexplored forbidden beach that awaited them on our side of the river. Once the warning was delivered, we would strategically relocate to the best view. The driver would, without fail, slowly proceed before quickly throwing the car into reverse as the beguiling sand consumed its wheels. My sisters and I would then move quickly into our rescue ritual, Act 2. If the tide was about to change, we'd have to be swift. My oldest sister was a master at calling the tides. She would run up to the ocean to her knees and stand perfectly still. If the sand was disappearing from her toes, she would send a thumbs up, which meant the tide was going out, They gave us a little bit of time. If seaweed was washing in towards her, that was a thumbs down incoming tide. Incoming tides were a bad omen. In this particular incident, we watched her thumbs down go to hell dance, which meant to us the tide was about to change. I was the youngest and had proudly earned the name of Pee-wee the Loudmouth. Well earned. I had to be obtrusive to get one single word in with my family. Naturally, I would be the one to run to the mouth of the river and shout instructions to the driver. You need to gather what you can. Get back to the other side of the river. We'll call a tow for you. But you're going to lose everything when this tide changes. So grab what you need tonight and get over to the other side. My sister would add with a chuckle, I suggest you grab the kids first. Then she'd make the mad dash half a mile or so to the cabin to call Tiny, the tow truck driver, who gladly, for a price, would casually drive to the scene. My dad had nicknamed our beloved local tow truck driver Tiny. He was a large, chubby man who would eventually arrive. He would park his truck and waddle to the riverbank, place his hands on his hip, and semi-laughingly hold out his hands as the victims peeled out the 20s. Hey, yeah, just to let you know, yeah, this is only cab fare. He'd wad up the cash and stuff it deep into his pockets. We're not saving that car. No, that car will be toast in about 20 minutes, I guess. He'd scratch his belly with oil-stained fingernails. That's about when the tide should change. In seemingly every case, the frantic driver would forcibly yank the tow chain and try to wade back into the quick-flowing water to attach the chain to his beloved vehicle. I wouldn't do that. Tiny would reach up and let out just enough chain so the driver could easily accomplish exactly what Tiny had advised him not to do. Be careful out there. Tiny would unlock his truck and invite the mother and any children into the cab to warm up. Tiny knew it all too well, yet never grew tired of his repetition, and neither did we. He'd slowly stretch out one hand in the air and send a quick wave out to us across the river. Hey, girls. Thanks for the call. Come up later next week. I'll give you a fudgesicle out of the tub. At this juncture, the driver would typically give up as the water rose to his thighs, then his waist, and eventually the engine of the vehicle. He would scramble to pull out the last of his belongings and swim back to the riverbank, dropping exhausted upon the shore. Tiny would steadily maneuver down the chain, hand over hand, through the cold, chest-high water and unhook the chain from the sinking vehicle. He'd start the truck and recoil the chain to its resting place in the back of the tow. My oldest sister would add a smart-ass comment. That's probably the most exercise Tiny gets all week long. We laughed together, huddled against the log. You cried. The driver would plead accusingly. You could have at least tried, he'd whisper. He'd watch the waves crescendo at the mouth of the river. Well, partner, Tiny would reply, I've tried before. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, those little girls over there, they tried to tell you before you crossed. I know them girls. They know this river better than any. He'd lift one thick eyebrow, check out the panicked driver to see if offense had been taken. A lot of people think they're smarter than this river, and buddy, today was just not your brightest day. Okay, let's get going. It's lunchtime and it should take about a week for them waves to pick up that car, move it up the river into that pile you see yonder. Tiny would point to the sculpture of unrecognizable rusted cars forged into the towering bluff, 200 or 300 yards up the river. Sitting silently, my sisters and I would watch nature's final credits roll. The waves would increase in size, bobble the car and lift it as the river deepened and widened. The waves would toss it over and spin it like a top, eventually flipping it, pushing it closer and closer to the impending bluff. Popping up, we'd dust the sand from our tattered jeans, join arm in arm, and skip down the beach towards our cabin. Around the age of 12, my father sold the house in Seattle and moved us permanently to the beach. He built a 5,000 square foot home on top of the cliff, not far from the cabin, overlooking the river and the monolithic rocks, then the windswept forest. The majority of the time, my sisters and I were still left to our own vices. My bipolar mother took off when I was 16, leaving me to care for my father. However, as children, we foraged for wild strawberries in the meadow, became expert shroomers, knowing what we could harvest and what not to touch. We knew the precise location of every eagle's nest in the old snags, witnessing them soaring majestically in pairs, hatching their chicks and teaching them how to steal seagull eggs from the nests atop the tidelands. We gathered buckets of Dungeness crab and skillfully digging them up by hand as they burrowed into the wet sand around the massive tide pools and dropped them into boiling salt water on a beach campfire, savoring every drop of the delicacy from their shells. We gathered hundreds of glass floats that had broken loose from the Japanese fishing trawlers during first storms and washed up on our small stretch of land like blue diamonds spinning and glistening in the foamy waves, bejeweled with barnacles, a gift from the sea that we treasured. Just this year, the big house was demolished and removed to make way for those who now flock by the hundreds to purchase just one piece of that remote beauty. Less than 5 miles down the coast, a huge development with over 500 modern homes and cabins have been snatched up by the city folks. It had been my father's dream to see this amazing distant beach populated and admired for the rare organic beauty of the land. He passed before he could witness that. The river eventually changed its trajectory and slowly eroded the banks, sweeping away homesteads and everything in its way into the ocean. The cabin still stands. Mighty and unyielding is that river, majestic and powerful, still forbidding passage to those who want to cross. That remote, desolate, rainy, wet, miserable, cold, lonely, beautiful, amazing childhood will live on in my dreams and imagination forever. Thank you.
Claudia Wright, ladies and gentlemen. Claudia Wright.